I'm not getting this because it's just throwing me off. Why did we change Stephanie Vacquer's theme? It brings me to a whole kind of discussion I wanted to talk about, in themes. I think a lot of people have talked about it recently, I guess. Usually it comes up during the Royal Rumble where, a lot of people come out, a lot of maybe newer performers or people with just like newer themes, and they're essentially not giving a pop, or there's not anyone recognizing their theme. And I think that does kind of come down to obviously a dip in quality in terms of not only memorable themes, but just kind of identifiable entrances. I don't want it to literally single out like Def Rebel specifically or anything, because I think there are some bangers by Def Rebel that they've put out. EO's theme slaps. I think the current Rhea's theme slaps. What's another really good theme? Like, I think Roman's Succession kind of ripoff is pretty good. They do a good job with certain themes, right? I think, but at the same time, there seems to be a lot of times where they'll change, or they'll like really mess with something that's working. Like LA Knight's music, for example. There are multiple iterations of LA Knight's music, and I don't know if that's because there was like some sort of legal trouble that happened with certain samples that were happening to create the sound. That can make sense, but it just seemed like there's a lot of times where there would be weird instrumentals taken out or stuff that made it sound flatter, which was just super weird. And then we've gotten the original version back, obviously, to people protesting it. A lot of times it seems like there's a lot of creative decisions and stuff that just happens that's not necessarily planned in terms of like how someone will come out, or even like the cinematography of an entrance, for example. Anytime we kind of see behind the scenes about people coming out, it does seem like the day of the show, all right, the set is built, we have set like if this was a legit running ship, you would think that the performers themselves would have an idea of like what things are going to look like before even showing up, and there's like fundamental narrative structures and ideas and things trained and rehearsed that we're going into to then start for this event that's happening. That to me screams like lack of forethought, lack of planning, execution, and precision that could really make something look amazing, right? Like Stephanie's entrance, for example. I feel like with all the stage production and people that they have that are super talented, that create these amazing sets and these overlays and these graphic designs and do all these things for them, right? I feel like if there was more of a synergy between kind of like what the talent and bookers are trying to envision for things and these people and this production team, there'd be I think a stronger resonance within kind of with the fan base in general. And what I mean by that actually specifically too is like if you look at like the scratch era kind of design philosophy, kind of how like the magazine, for example, that used to exist, there was obviously a alt rock slant to everything. There was an obvious vision in terms of the presentation with kind of how everything looked. When you kind of look at WWE now with the sanitized look, there isn't necessarily an identity in terms of aggression. It feels like a soulless kind of sports sponsor where with the various different themes, the genre switches, it doesn't feel like there's any unique identifiable WWE trait. I think a lot of fans identified with the heavy use of nu metal songs, the scratch logo kind of punk aesthetic that permeated a lot of the designs of pay-per-view logos and stuff like that, and in the music of all, and in the themes of everybody, right? So many people, in the end of the day, a lot of these songs are just like kind of alt rock or rap rock like rip-offs of popular songs, but they've become so iconic and ingrained in the brains of many youths and just enjoyers alike because of that I think all of those things resonating. I think the My Way package, for example, right, is so emotionally resonate for people because at the time it was music that hit, that fit this theme of the Attitude Era with the logos, the dingy lights, the dark aesthetic of people like The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the black and green of DX, their music, Rage Against the Machine inspired. Like, it was all synergized to feel like some sort of like, you can point to WWE as almost an aesthetic in a way. I think a lot of people now, especially with like Jeff Hardy, you know, and the revisionism of like how big he really was, right, are actually appreciating kind of like him and his style. But that his style and everything was super reflective of, you know, the kind of a rejection of the modern like wrestling gear at the time, which was a lot of 90s gear, and then kind of tearing it up and punking it out in a way, right, which I think has permeated in so much of the young high flyers that exist now that are all essentially Jeff Hardy, you know, or are inspired by Jeff Hardy, right? You know, just in general with the music, for example, I think we've lost that touch. It's become just like the logo, you know, lost the scratch logo, we lost that edge. It's become more of a sanitized product that's not that doesn't want to have a specific identity and kind of presence, you know what I mean? It wants to be able to assimilate into whatever kind of, I guess, spot it's in. For fans of the product isn't fun sounding in terms of any creative aspects, but for people who are trying to advertise it, right, to multiple markets and try to expand something, it is like dollar signs. And then that's what kind of gets me back to like the whole corporatization of WWE that's kind of happened with TKO, which I've kind of addressed very early on, a couple of months ago, I'd say, a lot, kind of when we were in a really bad drought of creative stuff. It does come down to that. It seeps into the music that's being made. You know, it becomes a surprise when Penta and Ray's music actually has legit guitarists that start working on it and innovating on it because, oh, they like the theme, like they realize fans liked it, so they leaned into it. You know, it's very seldom does it feel like those things happen, especially when like we get like essentially nostalgia themes of Sheamus, for example, or Finn, you know what I mean, where it's like they obviously understand that people prefer the older themes, but I'd assume maybe because of legal issues or some sort of like contractual issues with certain licensing of music, I could completely understand not being able to do certain things in that respect. But I do think, like, obviously they've brought back Finn's music actually because it gave him more aura. Another one, DIY, like I feel like essentially DIY got killed because they kept changing their music, which people were singing along to at a certain point. You like, I understand, for example, when Shinsuke goes heel, you don't want people humming his theme, so you kind of make it a weird instrumental that like still the same theme, but it kind of cuts people singing, which I understand. But when you're constantly just changing these themes and to the whim of especially when there's crowd reactions to them, that's where I'm trying to figure out why these things are happening. It has to be some sort of legal dispute or the way that Def Rebel and them are doing these themes, you know what I mean? There has to be constant revisions or changes, but like I just think there needs to be more of a synergy between the creative forces that book and manage talent and also promote and kind of create and run the production of the company, because it does feel like a lot of times there's a disconnect. Even in I think the way that WWE covers itself, there's now a lack of a disconnect where it's like with the magazine and everything, it kind of did feel like an X Games. It felt kind of more like a punkish kind of like alt entertainment brand that had its own kind of like cool, you know, like edgy coverage of itself, where it's like now trying to emulate ESPN despite it being not a fucking real thing, makes it look, or it makes it just, it just insults the intelligence of anyone who's trying to look at it, you know, with any, you know, with a suspension of disbelief. It's kind of stupid to see that how the rest of the world is covering wrestling in one way, and then you have the WWE website covering it acting like the rest of the internet doesn't exist. I do think a lot of those things kind of coincide with like not theme music that doesn't hit, you know, that doesn't really not only reflect the superstars, but feels kind of like dated and maybe trying to chase trends that don't really make sense because wrestling isn't necessarily about chasing trends. It just kind of ebbs and flows with the current time period. It's not bad to lean into rock rap again. Get people like Denzel Curry. That like it's so funny because sometimes you can tell like they really be going hard in the sequencing of the music they pick for certain pay-per-views, and they do a really good job. Like I think like Black and Gold NXT had a really good run of like good like alt metal and like new metal stuff. Not like NU metal, but like newer metal, like black metal and stuff like that people were into, that like I was getting put onto essentially, and a lot of alt stuff because NXT represented the alternative brand. There was like a specific branding that an approach that I think Triple H and Co wanted to have and have a feel for those shows. So you saw a lot of rock, a lot of rap, you know what I mean? And that gave it an edge and an identity, where it's like WWE now doesn't really necessarily have an identity, and it needs an identity, and it does come from its themes and the presentation of its characters. You can't depend on the idea that you're a spectacle if you're not giving me the specific spectacle, right? You know what I mean? Like, what is the spectacle? The glass breaking of Stone Cold's theme to that. There's still certain themes that work. Like Cody Rhodes' theme is super great. We have a lot of fun themes. Seth Rollins' theme is super fun. But in terms of like, like I think Rhea Ripley's is I think Rhea Ripley's is maybe one of the current top ones. Like this is my brutality. Like that whole thing like revs up the whole arena and gets you hype, right? And it's a mood switcher. Like everyone's theme should be a mood switcher, not necessarily this wrestler is a call out, and then like we can't be doing generic. We can't make a quick generic theme for somebody. Just seeing Stephanie Vecchia's like theme switched, you know what I mean, really got me thinking about like their presentation and stuff, because they've done a lot better with like lack of lights and the 3D LED crap and all that stuff. But man, I still think in terms of like music, you know what I mean, Titantron stuff, like let's do a little bit of a throwback. Like ESPN even will repost a lot of like not AMVs, but like adult wrestling MVs essentially that people make for the community, and it's like those are they're just way better done than the in-house WWE stuff, because they just have a better finger on the pulse than the people in WWE production. And that's really what it comes down to, it seems. I think especially through like the late 2010s into now, they've really not known what's popular, unfortunately, and it really has stunned them in terms of like, just take the Eminem record for the Raw theme, you know what I mean? And like that just it makes just WWE seem porn out of touch, and to people not even invested into it, that don't really care, that see it as an outside thing, it does come off as the hickey, you know what I mean, like, alright, they don't really know what they're doing, but they're taking the yeehaw, they put Playboy Cardi because they're like, that's rap, right? I don't know where I'm getting with that, but like it just makes wrestling look very carny when they try to do kind of like gimmicky stuff like that. I miss a lot more licensed songs. I kind of like AEW doing licensed songs too. Themes should be better. What do you all think? I think the music should be good. I wish I could play examples, but then I would get like flagged on YouTube or whatever for stuff. But yeah, what do you guys think? I feel like a lot of people, if they had better themes, we'd be more excited to see them, but who knows?